These two men lived inside a country where leaving was illegal, and the border was guarded by a huge wall, landmines, and guards with orders to shoot and kill people who tried escaping. So it would take a genius plan to have a shot at leaving, and these men were gonna give it their all. Peter Strelzyk and Gunter Wetzel lived in East Germany, a portion owned by the Soviets after World War II. The Allies would spend a lot of emeralds rebuilding the war-torn Western countries, and naturally the citizens of the East would flee. Over 20% of East Germany's population would leave in the first 16 years, so they had to step in and contain them. They started with a bunch of barbed wire, and eventually it turned into a concrete wall. This didn't stop other escape artists. In the city of Berlin, which was split into two, people stripped mine inside the basement of a bakery. They got all the way to the other side and helped 57 people cross, but Peter and Gunter wanted to go in the air to cross. They worked at a plastic factory together and would always talk about escaping, until finally the two decided to do it. They wanted to build a helicopter at first, but this was Minecraft, so they built a slime block flying machine. Actually, they couldn't get a helicopter engine powerful enough to bring both their families, so they settled with a hot air balloon. They weren't going in as complete noobs. Peter was a mechanic for the German Air Force, but this was it. It was a time before internet, and their country controlled the information. They had pictures of hot air balloons from a magazine though, so it would be trial and error. Wetzel literally said in an interview, "I looked at the picture and kind of estimated how big the balloon was." They went shopping and found a material used to line leather available to buy in a large amount. They brought it to Wetzel's house, sewing it together until it got so big they had to move to the basement. They crafted a burner out of a stovepipe, gas cylinder, hose valve, and nozzles. For the basket, they welded a steel frame, and now their creation was ready for its first flight. They drove to a forest clearing near the border and got set up. Their wives held the balloon open and they turned on the burner. Nothing happened. The balloon never even rose because the fabric let the hot air escape. They had to destroy the evidence and return home. Wetzel said this was when their sole focus became to make a balloon good enough to escape. They had to figure out how to get a good fabric so the balloon would actually rise this time. Peter made a glass tube to test the air pressure of fabric, which would save them from making a bunch of balloons and testing them. Eventually, they found a fabric called taffeta used in ball gowns. They traveled to a completely different city to buy it and checked out with 900 square meters of the material. They told the shopkeeper that it was for their boat club. They made a lot of adjustments to their second balloon, and Wetzel actually had physics books at his house. Their new one could hold 2,200 cubic meters of air. They even blew it up, but it became clear to them that it couldn't hold the weight of two families. Wetzel decided he would withdraw from the project, and he even stopped hanging out with Strelzyk in public. At first, he completely stopped trying to escape, because while working on the balloon, him and his wife kept talking about the risks, like crashing and their kids being hurt, and that they could be discovered at any moment by the police. Wetzel didn't work at the factory anymore, and was doing freelance work. Eventually, he got a new job as an ambulance driver, but at some point, he decided that if the Strelzyks got caught or escaped, the police could tie him to it, which led him to start up a new escape project. He went to his friend who was a glider pilot and said that he was interested in aviation and asked him for some pamphlets on it. He worked on ideas to build a plane and shared this photo on his website. During this, Strelzyk would finish the balloon and take his family for the second balloon escape attempt at 1:30 in the morning. In another forest clearing, they set up and pumped hot air and it started rising. They were now in the air and on their way to the border. The Strelzyks were going to escape without the Wetzels. A cloud saw this and said, "No, you will not escape without your friend," and collided with the balloon. The water vapor caused them to slowly fall back to the ground due to the weight. When they landed, they were still in East Germany. They managed to get back home without any problem, but that didn't stop the fact that now a huge balloon crash was near the border and the police would find it. And now it was on the newspapers saying that there's someone out there who committed a very bad crime. Wetzel saw it and there was pictures also listed, and he instantly knew that it was the Strelzyk family. They then reunited and decided they had no choice but to build a third balloon together. Since the last balloon could only carry one family, they had to make their next one even bigger. They went from 2,200 cubic meters to 4,200, but it wasn't going to be as easy this time. Since the police were on the hunt for them now, they couldn't just stroll into shops buying large amounts of fabric. This means they had to expand their fabric choice, like umbrella fabric, tent nylon, and as a last resort, bed linen. As they went city to city buying fabric, they were paranoid. Like when they were in a town called Sawfield and asked for 100 meters of taffeta, and the shopkeeper told them to wait for her to cut it. They took no chances and left. As they were buying fabric and sewing it, Wetzel got a letter telling him his medical exam was complete, and he had to start military service in November. They now had a deadline they had to finish before, or else he would be left behind and probably imprisoned. They did finish the balloon, but they had to hope the weather would clear before the holiday. It didn't happen. Well, for a while. On the 14th of September, Wetzel got a new driving job, but then shortly after, the weather cleared and they rushed to get the balloon ready. This would cause him to accidentally tear a hole in the balloon, but he decided it wasn't a big enough one to worry about. They drove to a hill to check for the weather, and it was perfect. They then drove to another field. Their paranoia still had a large effect on them, and they kept checking for people until they got set up at 1:30 in the morning. They got their balloon out the trailer, anchored it to the ground with 4 ropes, and started blowing it up. Strelzik operated the burner and heated up the balloon until it was ready. Wetzel got his kids out the car, who fell asleep, and they all got in. Immediately, their first problem happened. They didn't cut the ropes at the same time, and the burner tilted and lit the balloon on fire. But they were prepared. They put out the fire with an extinguisher and continued. In the dead of night, they quickly lost their direction. It was a tense feeling in the basket. And then searchlights were pointed at them, but they were high enough to not care. Then their third problem occurred. The burner went out. They got it going in short bursts, but they couldn't stop the now descent to the ground. They hit the surface hard and had no clue where they were. The wife and kids hid in a bush, and the men searched for clues. They saw farm machinery they've never seen before, and eventually a police officer, which they asked, "Are we in the West?" And he responded, "Of course you are. Where else would you be?" Finally, I got all the fabric cut. It took so long. Wait, where did y'all go?